Hello. Okay, so I'm back. Really wanted to take the time to, talk about what we're going to talk about now. And it's going to be brief. I'm just going to talk about social cognitive theory. I really subscribe to this. I think that it covers quite a bit as it goes with explaining human phenomenon, explaining things like motivation, right? Explaining why somebody might engage in a particular act. Why someone might hear someone else's story, and I'll explain that in a little bit when we talk about vicarious learning, and it makes them kind of go through and want to emulate that person, so to speak. But first, I'm going to take a second because something interesting happened whenever I was a youth. A certain person had quite an impact on some people. And I'm going to just read some things to you here for just a second, so bear with me. Um, and then we'll talk about what this is about. Look at these eyes, baby blue, baby just like yourself. Um, you know, skip down a little bit. See, the problem is, I speak to suburban kids who otherwise would have never knew these words exist, whose moms probably would have never gave. Straight out of the tube, right into your living room I came. And kids flipped when they knew I was produced by Dre. That's why they put my lyrics up under this microscope, searching with a fine-tooth comb. It's like this rope. White America, I could be one of your kids. White America, little Eric looks just like this. Okay, so some of you may know what I'm referencing, some of you may not. But so when I was talking about whenever I was a youth, people got very concerned about some of the words, which I definitely did a lot of editing there, that this particular individual used, that really wasn't that out of the norm for this particular genre of music. However, as he pointed out, it was different whenever it was someone that suburban kids could identify with. And yeah, myself and a bunch of other of my peers, bleach our hair, some of us had the blue eyes, and people were very concerned, right? And they were very concerned because this person was someone that perhaps a certain demographic of people could identify with within this genre of music that they hadn't actually ever identified with. And that goes into what we talk about whenever we look at this idea of modeling, which is one of the key pieces in Bandura's social cognitive theory. So when we talk about modeling, right? You've all probably by now, and I have the video even linked, heard about, seen, have plenty of information on the Bobo doll experiment, right? And how you have the vicarious learning in that. So when we talk about modeling, there's four processes at play, or four processes within this observational learning that occurs in modeling, right? It's that whole classic monkey see, monkey do. Now, there's definitely way more to it, right? There has to be an identification piece, which is, again, back to why there was such a concern about that particular lyricist that I admit that I was reading some of his words That's why there was such concern, because they felt like this demographic would identify with this particular individual. So the way I remember the processes in observational learning is I use the word ARM, like ARMM, right? So a long M, right? And what that is attentional processes, retention processes, motor reproduction or processes, and motivational processes, right? So hopefully you know by now and understand, especially when you take cognitive psychology, that one of the first piece in processing anything is attending to that information, unless it's something that goes subconsciously. So there has to be some type of attention paid to a particular stimulus for any of the other things to occur, so to speak, right? So attentional processes, right? Those are things like those cognitive functions, right? We view something, and we attend to it, right? It somehow makes its way through the cognitive system, how it needs to make its way through the cognitive system. And then hopefully what is suggested is if that information is retained, right? So if you're trying to teach somebody how to do something, right, you might model that particular behavior for that person. You might say, okay, watch me do this. If you're trying to teach somebody, how to throw a football, right? So you would teach you might model those mechanics for that individual. Hope that they retain that information, and then hope they have the ability to reproduce. So, they have functional arms, functional rotator cuff, whatever it may be, so that they have those functional processes where they can reproduce whatever it is you're trying to teach, and then that they're motivated. Now, I think that motivation should almost be, if not at the top, very close to, as it goes with what's going on here, because if I'm not motivated to attend to something, or if I have low levels of arousal, as it goes with brain activity, that's where I'm equating arousal to, then yeah, I'm probably not going to attend to it, and I'm definitely not going to care to reproduce it, right? So we have found that within the media, for instance, those models, right, role models, right, that they have to almost have this thing where if somebody's wanting a large demographic of people to identify with this particular model, then there's got to be some reason they're motivated to do so. There's got to be some reason they're motivated to attend to that. Especially, your attention is a commodity, right? Think about it. Look at this, buy this, eat this, drink this, believe this, don't believe that. Right? You get the point. Like, your attention is a valuable commodity that people want. So when we're looking at modeling, 4 processes involved: attention, retention, reproduction, motivation. ARM, I'm always able to remember it that way. And again, this goes into social cognitive theory. I'm going to grab something I have hanging on my wall. This is how much I believe in social cognitive theory. Don't worry about that. Okay, so some of the ways that this is like a little map. I don't know if I'm holding it up right. Let me see if I can get that up there. We're doing it old school here. I don't have all the fancy equipment that you would probably need. But if you want to screenshot that, or however it is you retain information, right? It's like a little handy kind of map I've created as it goes with some of the key tenets of social cognitive theory. How the modeling affects behavior, right? Does it facilitate behavior? Does it inhibit behavior? Or is there disinhibition, right? Sometimes you'll see these techniques used when we're talking about disinhibition of behavior, where, what is that about? Well, I observe this person not being punished or rewarded for something. So again, this is in observational learning, right? Then I either engage in that behavior as well, which is why sometimes with classroom management, usually at the more like, lower level, not necessarily in college, if there's a kid that's acting out, they might punish that child in front of everyone, and then that can either have a facilitatory effect, an inhibitory effect, or a disinhibitory effect. So facilitatory, if for some crazy reason someone else observes this and they see that they're getting attention, even if it's bad attention, then they may also engage in that behavior. Or they see somebody getting, so even if the person is getting punished or rewarded, right, they still might engage in that behavior if that's motivating for them to get, if really all they want is attention, whether it be good or bad. More than likely, whenever we observe someone being punished, we view somebody doing something and they're punished for it. It's supposed to have an inhibitory effect, right? I don't want to do that, right? So sometimes some techniques used is, if someone's acting out, a very, very severe thing is to actually punish the other people around them in some way. But then usually what happens is they see this person being punished, and then they too do not want to engage in that behavior. And then the suggestion on the disinhibition, right? So if I observe somebody doing something, getting away with it, then what's suggested based on observational learning is that I might feel comfortable also engaging in that behavior, because what's going to happen, Okay, so that's, modeling tied with observational learning and tied with, how modeling can affect behavior. And again, these are some of the assumptions. There's this, what I like about social cognitive theory is something known as reciprocal causation. So this is kind of a next, right? So with reciprocal causation, it's the person interacting with the environment, interacting with their behavior. Oh, this is like so old school. Right? So you see that reciprocal process right here, right? Reciprocal causation. I know it's blurry, but it's person, behavior, environment. Okay? So, and the suggestion there is there's this constant interaction between all three of those, right? Personal variables within the individual interacting with their particular environment, and then some type of behavior being produced. And it doesn't necessarily go in that order either. It's not saying, oh, this is a linear relationship, person, behavior, environment. No, there's this reciprocal relationship where they're all interacting with everything, and they're all affecting the other, right? If you have, maybe you place somebody in what you think is the perfect environment, as those that believe in the tabula rasa might do, and you're not taking into consideration personal variables, things like, levels of intelligence. And what I mean by that is, are they intellectually disabled or not intellectually disabled, right? So do they have the actual capacity to do whatever it is you're wanting them to do, right? And then you try to predict some type of behavior associated with that. And we often get that wrong if we're not taking into consideration all the possible variables. Another thing that's interesting about observational learning is I kind of call it this idea of vicarious self-efficacy. Okay, what does that mean? So in certain circles, right, in certain places where people, go to try to find support and help with, addiction issues. And again, I use addiction, economy of expression. Okay, do what you will with that. We know that these 12-step groups exist, and that's what I'm referring to. So within these 12-step groups, a big thing that is part of it is somebody who's been sober, for some period of time. They get up in front of everybody and they tell their story. They say what it was like before they got sober, so when they were using, what happened that caused them to want to get sober or to change, and then what it's like now, right? And the hope with that is that you have somebody that's out in that crowd that they're maybe, they've just got an invitation to jail, or they know they need to stop, and they're maybe one day sober, and they don't know how they're going to stay sober for, 5 years, 1 month, however long it may be. And then they have this person that gets up in front of everybody and they tell their story, and then this other person in the crowd possibly identifies with that story, and they say, you know what, this person I identify with, right? So we're back at modeling. I identify with this person. We have almost the same story, or our stories are pretty much the same, but the details are different, right? But either way, I can identify with that person. And so if this person was once where I was, right, and they were able to make this change, then maybe I can make this change, right? You know, at a lesser extreme, you see this happening with college students. You know, you have a peer that decides that they want to be competitive for doctoral coursework, and so you have it's your peer, and you're like, well, I'm a lot like this person. We're about the same age. You know, we score about the same on our opportunities. You know, to demonstrate knowledge, we kind of maybe even come from the same background, whatever it may be, right? I identify, and this peer of mine is going through and, you know, making themselves competitive doctoral coursework. Maybe I can do that, right? That's the idea behind vicarious learning. That's the idea. Even when I'm saying vicarious self-efficacy, like, okay, I engage in a particular performance, right? I perform in a certain way on a particular task. So if we go back to that individual that's one day sober, but then, you know, they are doing what they need to do to stay sober. They have some verbal persuasion going on. So, hey, you can do this, right? Like maybe that person's telling their story, comes out and starts talking to them, and they really get into it, you know, really click and connect. And so they start, you know, talking with each other and they help each other out. You know, those are those verbal persuasions tied with vicarious experiences, and then the actual physiological things that are occurring. So, you know, in that case, it would be, you know, not actually putting the drink or drug in the person's mouth, or using, right? And so, as this person goes on, right, they start to develop self-efficacy. They start to believe, I can do this, right? You know, I'm going to be okay. You know, I have the ability to do this. And so they go on, right? And let's say that they have an experience, like maybe the death of a close person or the death of a relationship, or, you know, some of those real kind of tragic events, which, you know, some alcoholics and addicts will tell you, you know, it doesn't matter. You know, everything's a reason to drink, right? My birthday, your birthday, the children's birthday, Jesus' birthday, the dog barked, the phone rang, whatever it may be, right? These are all, it doesn't matter. But there are those things that are a little bit more high risk than others, right? So let's say this person, every time they got broke up with, they went out and used, okay? So now they're here, they're like, you know, 3-4 months sober. They're doing whatever it is they need to do to stay sober. They're starting to feel confident that they can stay sober. And then they did get, and they you know, they had a girlfriend or boyfriend or significant other, whatever, and and they were invited to leave that relationship. And so previously they would always go and use over that, but then this time they don't. Right? This time they don't use over that, and they walk through that. They feel all those feelings, right? And they walk through that without using one day at a time. What's suggested is now this person has a mastery experience, right? They have a mastery experience they can put in their back pocket, so to speak, right? Like, hey, I can do this, right? And you keep having these mastery experiences, you know. So you can equate this with, you know, whatever you want to equate it to, but you keep having these mastery experiences to where eventually you have this self-efficacy that you can do it. This happened with me, okay? Tell you a little bit about myself, and then probably close out. So I went to college right out of high school. I was supposed to go to SFA, but decided not to. I stayed around Waco and went to a local community college called MCC. Well, I was here for a year. I was doing okay, and then I decided that I needed to leave, all right, and go to Texas State in San Marcos. Big mistake. I was 19. Actually, I was 20. I turned 21 while I was there. And I was there for a year and came back with 9 hours. Not good, right? Like, you should definitely not be coming back with only 9 hours. So, I kind of resigned myself that maybe college wasn't for me. And so I went on, started working a full time job, very, manual physical labor, definitely didn't ever have to go work out. And so what ended up happening is I knew I was going to have to do something. I knew I needed to go back. I needed to get an education because I have found that to be the best way to, improve my quality of life. And so I go back and I just take a couple classes from MCC and I do, well enough in those classes that I start to build a little bit of confidence. Because remember, I'd resigned myself. Maybe, I can't go to college. Maybe college isn't for me. But then I go back, I take a couple of night classes while working this full-time job. I do well in them. I'm more motivated now. I've observed my peers doing well. So all of these things at play, right? We're talking about with social cognitive theory, with observational learning. So I do that, and I decided, this is going to work out, or I'm thinking it might work out to do, to go to college and try to finish up a degree. I finished up those core classes at MCC, and then I met a great person with Tarleton, who served as my advisor, my professor, my mentor. Really, really gave me a shot and was one of these verbal persuasive vicarious experiences type individual for me, right? Back to building self-efficacy. She's actually your department head, Dr. Reinerson. And so I try to give her as much shout outs and props that I can anytime I can. So anyway, I take Tarleton undergraduate psychology classes here in Waco, and I do well in them. I'm making A's, in fact, in these classes. I'm on these like special lists, and you know what I'm talking about, right? And so I'm just building more and more confidence, right? Like more and more mastery experiences, right? Oh, I didn't used to, score well on these, or I didn't used to study, or I didn't used to do this, or I didn't used to do that. And then I just keep building and building those mastery experiences. I keep getting more and more self-efficacy, right? I start building goals. I start having a more challenging selection of activities, right? These are all the things that you end up seeing whenever self-efficacy is in play, right? So these are kind of the things before, and then these are the things after. And so activity selection, right? The goals that I set, I stayed persistent at it. I kept wanting to learn and wanting to achieve until eventually I got that undergraduate psychology degree and then went straight into the grad program. And so all of those things, Reinerson would say that, I created an environment for you to thrive in, but you still had to, and you still had to have the motivation. So the personal factors, right? And then you still had to engage in the behaviors for success, right? So right there, person, behavior, environment, reciprocal causation, all of those things interacting. Not linear though, right? That's something I hope that you get, that and that very few things are black or white. So, I was a GA through grad school, and even, things worked out really well. Now I get to be in my dream job, and I get to turn around and, they definitely, use me as their model, in that, and I do that quote unquote, because no, not like a, Derek Zoolander model, but just modeling like basically the story I just told you. So you have that, and they MCC likes it because I, went through them and did the associate's degree because it was built into the degree anyway, and they like people to get their associate's degree, and then I transitioned into the Tarleton Waco psychology program, and so that's exactly kind of and then I did the grad program, and it's almost like the exact process, right? It's like the hair club for men, right? Not only am I the president, but I'm also a member, right? No. Some of you may remember those commercials, maybe not. Okay, so hopefully that gave you some good real life examples of what social cognitive theory looks like. That's definitely a very brief overview. I didn't get into all the nuts and bolts and deep things. I do respect Bandura quite a bit, and I do very much subscribe to social cognitive theory. But again, some of the main pieces there: reciprocal causation, modeling, right, through observational learning, which the Bobo doll experiments show you that. The different ways that we learn based on social cognitive theory, and then, the things associated with self-efficacy and self-regulation. So, hopefully that helps you to get some real life examples and understand that a little bit better. Hope you're all doing well, and I will make one more video to close up the class, because we're getting there, right? Woo! Have a little bit of summer left for you, and then that'll be it. All right, y'all have a good day.